Our manifesto will be an offer, and we believe the policies in it are very popular.
So what will voters make of this offer from Jeremy Corbyn? Tonight we analyse in full the politics, the policy and the reaction to the leaked manifesto as we understand it so far. Is it really as radical as it looks? It's full of bold proposals but major spending implications for the country too. Do voters want to see a bigger state?
It's not as if, from what we've seen at any rate, that they've come up with things that people don't want. The problem is they've come up with everything that everybody wants.
Many of the ideas have a popular ring on the doorstep. Will people trust those bearing the message? David Grossman has been gauging reaction.
I normally vote for Labour. I'm a member of the Labour Party. But I'm loath to say what I really think at the minute.
Go on, tell me.
No.
And where does this manifesto fit into the political firmament? Our panel is raring to go with our exclusive left-right blackboard. Hello, good evening. It was not so long ago we moaned about all political parties looking and sounding the same. Failure to offer proper choice to the voter, failure to bring anything new to the table. Well, no one looking at Labour's manifesto, in whatever form it finally emerges, can parrot that line now. If the leaked draft remains true to character, then this is a bold political treatise and one we're exploring across the show tonight. It offers a role for the state perhaps not seen since the post-war days of Clement Attlee. It seeks bigger national services for both health and education on top of the renationalisation of some rail and energy firms. You can call it backward-looking if the talk of unions and a new department for Labour makes you think of the 1970s, or you can call it forward-looking if you think it speaks to a generation emerging from Britain's worst economic crisis with little. It is, in Jeremy Corbyn's words, a promise to transform the lives of many people. And it involves huge quantities of new spending. Well, tonight we'll analyse the politics, the policies and the reaction so far. Nick Watt, our political editor, is here. We know, Nick, we haven't got the costings in what we know of today, but did they say any more in the meeting this afternoon about where those leaks came from? We'll talk about substance in a second.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn is absolutely furious with that leak, and he has commissioned an independent commission to find out what happened there. And his allies believe that the so-called moderates, those are the people in the Labour movement who tried and failed to dislodge him last year, that they were behind the leak. They regard this as a deeply hostile act to ensure that the manifesto was portrayed, as it was on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, as a throwback to the 1970s. And what these Corbyn allies are saying is that they think that the moderates want this to be seen as a new version of the 1983 manifesto, that famous one, so that that would ensure a heavy defeat for Labour, and then they would be able to come after him again. Now, one Corbyn ally said to me they are utterly confident the manifesto is not like the 1983 one. It is, as they say, punter-friendly. There are compromises, but I was told that if the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs had persuaded Ed Miliband to do half of this last time, they would have been ecstatic.
Any word then from the moderates tonight?
Perish the thought that they would have leaked this manifesto, of course. Now, some of them believe that this manifesto is about turning out the core Labour vote on June the 8th so that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't suffer a massively heavy defeat and then he can stay on as Labour leader. I was told by one of these senior figures on the so-called moderate side today that John McDonnell actually faced quite a lot of questioning at this meeting today over what I was described as the vast spending commitments in this manifesto. And John McDonnell did say, look, it's fully costed and that will be published next week. But then this senior Labour figure said this to me: this manifesto will never be implemented, so it's all rather academic. So in a way, today really sort of ended up being the unofficial launch of the Labour manifesto. Prime Minister Corbyn? It's been a bruising journey, but Jeremy Corbyn has finally won the approval. It's been a bruising journey, but for a manifesto he believes should provide the route into number 10. Today was meant to be a relatively low-key event, but the traditional pre-election Clause 5 meeting to approve the Labour manifesto turned into a bit of a media circus after draft versions were leaked. If Jeremy Corbyn could wave a magic wand, he would not be producing this exact document. It commits a future Labour government to renewing the Trident nuclear deterrent after he failed to change party policy. But the leaked versions of the manifesto do encapsulate his core beliefs about the need for a massive programme of public investment, the gradual nationalisation of his beloved railways and other state interventions. Labour may have been forced to finalise the manifesto at short notice, but this did not have the feel of a credo scribbled out on the back of a fag packet.
The details will be set out to you, including the costings of all the pledges and promises that we make.
Chief strategists have been working on the document since Jeremy Corbyn's re-election last year, after becoming convinced that the Prime Minister would go to the polls. One early supporter who became disillusioned with Jeremy Corbyn was impressed.
I do think the manifesto, in terms of its key policies and the vision, because people generally don't vote in elections based on individual policies, a vision about realising this country's great potential, not being held back anymore because of vested interests, and investing in our public services, investing in the economy. If that can cut through, then Labour have a chance to turn this around.
One veteran of Labour elections agrees it will appeal on the doorsteps, though there is a weakness.
It is an extraordinary document from what we've seen. It's got everything in it. It's a cornucopia of ideas. It's everything that everybody said in a focus group that they would like their government to do for them. But the problem is that that's kind of not how it works when you think about election pledges. That's not what gives you credibility. Take the cap on energy prices. Ed Miliband introduced it in the first place and promised it. They looked at him and didn't believe he was going to deliver.
The so-called Labour moderates had feared the Corbyn team would produce a 21st century version of the party's 1983 manifesto, famously dubbed the longest suicide note in history. One veteran of Labour's most recent election loss believes this comparison is only partially fair.
I see quite a lot of material in this manifesto which is familiar to people who helped write 2015 manifesto. I see quite a lot in this manifesto which will be familiar for people who watched the 1983 general election as we're heading to disaster. I think the truth of manifestos and the truth of general election campaigns is we never know what they mean until afterwards.
The country will soon be sizing up the choice between Labour and its vision of public investment and Theresa May and her famed strong and stable leadership. Corbyn supporters believe they are on strong ground.
David Cameron promised in the 2015 election 2 years ago stability against the chaos of Ed Miliband. We've not had a more chaotic period of British history since World War II, so I don't quite think they delivered on it last time.
In 4 weeks' time, Britain could have a Prime Minister who for 30 years was shunned by his own party as a marginal figure on the left. We now have a chance to decide whether Jeremy Corbyn's vision, with the odd revision, should entitle him to take his place in number 10.
Nick Watt there. Well, Barry Gardiner, who was in that meeting a little earlier, joins me now. Thanks very much for coming in. And the IFS has said today that this manifesto is about the state becoming much more deeply involved in our way of life, that more in the public sector, more in the private sector than it has been since the 1970s, possibly since the 1940s. Would you agree with that?
No, I don't think so at all, Emily. Look, what we're doing today is actually we're trying to free people up from all the things that are holding them back. I mean, if you look at a young couple today, they can't get even a deposit for a rented accommodation. They can't get a mortgage. They can't start a family. And they're saying, why? We're both in jobs, we're both working, and yet we can't do the things that our parents could easily have done at that age. You know, look at teachers who feel that they're not able to be doing in schools and teaching kids in the way that they want.
But you wouldn't be ashamed, presumably, about the idea of the state getting bigger to help, would you?
But look, let me finish. It's not about statism. This is about freeing people people up. It's about letting them do the things that they can do, that they should be doing. It's about innovation. I mean, I thought it was so funny, actually, when you had the piece at the very beginning, that the woman was almost criticising this manifesto. She said, the trouble is this manifesto offers people everything that they want.
This is not me. This is the IFS reading your manifesto as it stands so far. The state getting deeply involved in much more of the private sector in a way it hasn't been since the 1970s, perhaps since the 1940s. That's wrong, is it? We're not going to see a bigger state. We're going to see a smaller state or a shrinking state, or where are we going to be?
What we're trying to do is trying to enable people to get on with their lives and feel that they are properly rewarded for doing the things that they just simply want to do, right?
So is the state going to be bigger or smaller or the same? It's a very simple question.
The state is going to regulate in terms of taxation. You've seen what the Conservatives have said. They won't give any promise on VAT. They won't give any promise on the basic rate of
intervention. You're talking about intervention. You're talking about nationalisation.
Yes,
you're talking about lots of ways in which you'll be spending more on infrastructure and all the rest of it. You're talking about a national education service as well as a national health service. So just tell us, the state will get bigger and we're proud of it.
Well, isn't it wonderful that we're talking about putting, you know, £500 billion pounds.
I don't know why you seem to be embarrassed to be backing what is very obvious in here.
Oh, no, Emily, I'm not embarrassed. You're trying to put me into a form of words, and I don't want the form of words.
Let me ask you something in a different way.
Let's talk about the substance. No, let's talk about the substance. Because you're talking semantics. I want to talk about the substance, OK? I want to talk about the substance that says we're going to do a Crossrail, not just a second Crossrail in London, but we're going to do one from the west coast to the east coast of the north of England.
Big ideas, isn't it, Barry?
Exactly.
I want to talk about, is this a socialist?
This is exciting.
Is this a socialist manifesto? If the country votes for this, for your Labour government into power, do we become a socialist country or social democrat country?
You're obsessed with labels. Let's talk about the issues.
I'm trying to understand your big picture. There is a philosophy here from a man who has believed the same things for 3 decades. And we're trying to understand what that is.
No, it's not just from a man, right? It's from today. There were 60 people in that room. Right?
Ed Miliband said he was a socialist. He was proud. Are you proud to be a socialist? Is this a socialist manifesto?
The Labour Party has always been a democratic socialist party, and that's where I stand. And I will always stand there. But it's not about me, and it's not about names. It's about ensuring that people who feel that they're being held back in this country because, you know, Sure Start centres are closing, because they've taken £4.6 million out of social care, because the health service, we saw the figures today, 2.5 million people now waiting more than 4 hours, you know, to get into an A&E. These are the issues. And what we're saying is we have solutions to all of this. And the lady said, yes, it's what everybody wants.
And you're right. Big efforts to increase spending on social care, on the NHS, certainly on education. We heard from Jeremy Corbyn yesterday.
Taking back the franchises on the railways.
Right. And one area that I know you'll agree matters hugely to voters, of course, is immigration. Fair rules and reasonable management of immigration. So just talk us through, because there's not an awful lot in the pages that we've read so far about the immigration policy. We know you don't like the Theresa May idea of tens of thousands of a cap. Will there be any kind of cap?
Hang on. Theresa May doesn't like the tens of thousands idea because she tried to get down to tens of thousands. She promised to get down to 10,000 when she was Home Secretary, and it's now at 270,000. She didn't do very well there. And that was when she was Home Secretary.
So you're saying don't bother with the cap?
No, let me be clear about what we've said. We've said we will put our economic policy before our immigration policy, and that we will make sure that we have immigration into this country that is beneficial to our economy, that creates jobs in our society, that allows us to be a prosperous and innovative society where we're growing our economy. That's the right way to do it. What she's doing is she's subordinating the economic policy to immigration controls.
If I'm a Labour
That's
voter
crazy.
and I care a lot about immigration and I want to know what that means in concrete terms, and you're telling me now the number's about 270,000, would you be happy to see that go up? Could it?
OK, let me be very clear. At the moment, for the rest of the world, we have immigration controls. They're Tier 1 visas, Tier 2 visas, Tier 4 visas, and so on.
Yeah.
That's what we have. We have those controls in place.
Just talk to me about the numbers. Just talk to me broadly. Yeah. Would you be happy if it went up to 300,000?
Immigration numbers will always go both down and up according to the needs of the economy. And
but if they go up, you're relaxed about it. If they go to 500,000.
OK. If it's beneficial to our economy, if it's actually providing jobs and growth in this country, and if that jobs and growth is then being distributed fairly through the system, because that's been the problem with the way in which society's run.
Understood.
It hasn't been distributed fairly through the system.
So as long as they're beneficial, it could go up to $1 million and you'd say, that's fine, we're relaxed because it's benefiting the economy. Is that right?
Look, again, it's so silly trying to trap me into a number and a form
Do you know
of
what?
words.
It's
really
not
is.
a trap.
No, it is.
You're talking to voters. You are talking to voters for whom immigration is literally the central issue. It's what drove many people to vote for Brexit.
Do you not think their job is the central issue? Do you not think the fact that they are locked in a 0-hour contract and that they can't afford even to set up a home or start a family, is that not the central issue for them?
Labour's message is perhaps immigration
their children
isn't as important. It isn't a priority. That's fine,
No,
but you can say that then. It's not a priority for us.
We're not saying... Look, again, you're trying to trap me into a form of words. It's not about it not being a priority. It's not being about the number one priority. What we're saying is the key thing in our society is to have a fair society. That's why we're talking about fair management and control of immigration. That's what we're talking about.
There's nothing in here about free movement.
No,
There's nothing in here about free movement.
Of course not, because free movement, when we leave the European Union, and we accept we're leaving the European Union, the free movement of people goes. The free movement of people only exists within the internal market, and we are not going to be in the internal market.
And you're accepting that. If a Labour government is in power in June, you will accept then that free movement goes?
We've already said that.
So
sorry, you're behind the times.
Right.
We've been very clear. Keir Starmer has been out there.
That's not in your manifesto. Why wouldn't you just say we don't mind free movement going?
Forgive me. You've seen a leaked draft of a manifesto. You haven't seen the manifesto.
So it is in the full one. Is it on Tuesday?
Well, we'll see on Tuesday. But take it from me, what Keir Starmer has been saying for weeks on your programme and on others is that the Labour Party accepts that we are leaving the European Union, and as we are leaving, we are no longer going to be a member of the European Union. Therefore, free movement of people stops because it's free movement within the internal market.
It's just interesting. That's not actually in the draft at all.
Let's go to the exciting things about this manifesto, right? Let's talk about the way in which we actually have a vision for society that is about innovation, a vision for society that is creating a low-carbon economy, low-carbon future, doing all the things for the environment, making sure that we protect the environment in the way that this government wants to deregulate.
Said this is a wonderful list of policies. Absolutely. There is something for everyone. It is a catalogue of delightful things. And yet we've got this Mirror poll, a paper that presumably you're quite friendly towards, on the back of this, after the manifesto, saying fundamentally this is a whole list of things that people want to see, but there is no confidence in the capability of the leadership to deliver this.
Well, let me be absolutely clear. On Tuesday next week, when we launch this manifesto, every single element of that manifesto will be costed absolutely clearly, how much it's going to cost and where that money is coming from. So we are absolutely clear that we can deliver all the things that we are promising to do.
A week ago today, you were losing 500 councillors in the local elections. You were losing in the South Valleys of Wales. You were losing in Glasgow. You were losing in Teesside.
What's that got to do with the money?
Because, no, I didn't talk about money. I talked about credibility in your party to deliver this. And surely you have already been to the electorate once this month.
OK.
And they don't seem to believe that you are the party that's capable of delivering that.
So you think that we've lost this election before the vote is counted? I don't. I believe this is a transformative manifesto. I believe exactly what your introduction said, that this is telling people that Labour will deliver all the things that they genuinely want, all the things that they think have been holding them back in society are going to be taken away, that there's going to be a redress of the inequalities in this country. And that is the way that people can move from what they thought about local elections in rural areas to what's going to happen on June the 8th, because we have policies. The Conservative Party next Monday will not give you a single policy. They have kept their ministers stum the whole time.
Rural areas like Glasgow, like Teesside.
We have the policies to take Britain forward. They don't.
Barry Gardiner, thank you. Thanks for coming in. So will this emerge as the manifesto Jeremy Corbyn has dreamed of these past few decades? How radical will it look in practice? Perhaps the standout statement is the unashamed commitment to some higher taxes and much greater public spending. We know little of the costing details of the commitment. That comes next week, and we've been told it has already been sorted out. But what would Corbyn's Britain look like? Here's a little glimpse from our policy editor, Chris Cook.
The leaked Labour manifesto has certainly proved to be distinctive. Each newspaper has found something to say, not least because the document promises a lot of extra public spending.
Labour will abolish university tuition fees. Labour will commit to over £6 billion extra in annual funding to the NHS.
And some offsetting tax rises.
The highest 5% of earners will be asked to contribute more in tax.
From what we can tell, Labour are planning a substantial increase in tax, possibly an even bigger increase in spending. That would mean more borrowing. But they do have a rule on debt. It says it has to fall as a share of national income over the Parliament, and it's possible that even with their additional borrowing, they'd be on course to meet that rule.
The other parties will try to make the case, as they always do, that Labour's sums don't add up.
What Labour's political opponents will be doing is going through it, looking for expensive things and trying to kind of come up with a grand total for how much the Labour platform costs to try and undermine its credibility so that people can't go, oh, actually, I quite like that idea, because the truth is it's all undeliverable.
But manifestos aren't bean-counting exercises. They make arguments. And this one focuses in large part on the gig economy. Labour wants to raise employment standards through higher minimum wages and so-called sectoral bargaining.
Well, sectoral bargaining would really help workers in low-paying industries like care, hospitality and logistics, but it would help good employers too and stop them being undercut by the bad. And it's very simple. It's about setting a framework agreement, employers and unions getting around the table and setting minimum standards for pay, skills and other conditions.
It's still the case, even today, that your public services are, by and large, run by public sector workers. But it's also true that in recent decades, policymakers have got more relaxed about the idea that if the public sector can't offer the service they want at a price they like, they'll go to the private sector instead. And this draft manifesto proposes changing direction on that front. Specifically, it suggests ending the franchising of rail services and proposes reversing the involvement of the private sector in the NHS. The manifesto also proposes changes for companies involved in state business.
Roll out maximum pay ratios of 20:1 in the public sector and for companies bidding for public contracts.
And proposes extensions of the role of the state.
At least one publicly owned energy company in every region of the UK.
I'll tell you this, I wouldn't be sorry if it was a 60% tax ban.
But this is all a long way to the right of where Mr Corbyn used to position himself. There's no wider nationalisation plan. It does contain Trident renewal. How then are some of Mr Corbyn's old friends taking it?
Back in 1983, I was a young Benite foot soldier, very sold on the idea of a fundamental and irreversible shift in the balance of power towards working people and their families. We were talking about policies such as a planned economy, import controls, nationalisation of one key company in every economic sector. Clearly, what we've got today is nothing like that, but Britain is a very different country. This is very much the right package for Britain in 2017.
For left stalwarts, it's a step in the right direction. And some of their ambitions about the role of the state have evolved in the last few decades, as one Margaret Thatcher said they would.
3.5 years ago, defenders of the status quo tried to brand denationalisation as irrelevant. How absurd it will seem in a few years' time that the state ran Pickford's removals and Gleneagles Hotel.
Really going to be able to pay? So it's not a 1970s Labour left prospectus. This isn't 1983. But you probably won't be able to tell that from the attacks about to come Labour's way.
Chris Cook there. So what does this manifesto tell us about the age we're living? Is austerity dead and is state spending back? Joining us now, Anne Pettifor, the economist who runs Prime Economics, and John Peet, political editor of The Economist. It's lovely to have you both here. it does seem interesting this time around, it's not just Labour, that no one is really talking about austerity or debt or the deficit. Do you think we've just sort of shelved that now?
Yes, we have, because it didn't work. I mean, because we were told, economists told politicians, that all they had to do was cut spending and the public debt would fall. And the public debt has stubbornly stayed high. And the politicians are now both confused and embarrassed, and we're in a sort of limbo, not knowing which way to turn. I mean, I'm hoping that people will finally realise that actually you don't pay for public services from taxation, and governments have never paid for public services from taxation. They loan finance. They use loan finance to pay for public services.
I wonder what you make of that. I mean, there was a certain moral high ground, wasn't it, that all the politicians were saying, don't pass debt on to your grandchildren, don't saddle the next generations.
And now we have.
I mean, we have saddled our future generations with a lot of debt. I think the reason it's slightly gone out of the window, there are two reasons. The first is that Brexit is going to be the overwhelming issue for the next government, whoever it is. The second is actually the deficit has come down quite substantially. And actually, even in this manifesto, John McDonnell, as the Shadow Chancellor, is insisting everything is carefully costed, and there is a promise that they will try and balance the current budget within 5 years. So they are, at least in their language, still talking about reducing the budget deficit and not adding to the public debt. And so are the Tories.
Is, in this sense, an extraordinarily conventional politician. You know, he is, and the Labour Party has. The Labour Party is known. Labour governments have been far more fiscally conservative than Conservative governments.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
Neither party seems nearly as scared of nationalisation this time round, whether it's, you know, talk of the railways, talk of the Royal Mail, or in Theresa May's case, you know, cap on energy fees. There is intervention either side now, right?
Well, look, we've just had the most massive state intervention in our economy, in our history. We found £1,000 billion overnight to bail out the banking system. That was state intervention. The state is currently backing all the world's big banks.
So
with government guarantees, with easy money, with low interest rates.
Maybe Labour has read the mood of the nation right then, that actually we are prepared for more state intervention. Certainly the newer generation want a bit more of a...
I think there are certainly areas in it. Nobody can really object to the principle that you might want to have a state-owned railway. And this issue has come up many times before.
But I do think
the general direction of this manifesto, and sometimes I have to say the general direction of the Tory government under Mrs May, has been one in which they talk up an industrial strategy, more intervention in the labour market. This manifesto is proposing 20 new workers' rights. It's even suggesting that we should move British labour law to make it more like continental European law, in which it's harder to fire people.
And isn't that exactly what this country has asked for in the referendum?
Well, I think the point is that a lot of people, individual parts of this are going to be very popular. Yes, the railways might be popular. It sounds popular to say let's get rid of 0 hours contracts. It sounds popular to say let's have an excessive pay levy on companies that pay too much. But the lesson that we did learn in the 60s, 70s and 80s was excessive state ownership can be bad for the economy, and excessive regulation of the labour market, which we've seen in continental Europe, can drive up unemployment.
This is not a state market issue. The fact of the matter is that if the economy were thriving, if the banks were servants to the economy and not masters of the economy, if the finance sector hadn't wrecked the economy, then the private sector would be very much bigger as a share of the whole economy. What happens when the private sector shrinks, as it has done over these last 10 years, and not recovered, is that the state becomes a bigger part of the cake. The point that all politicians should take on board is that to make the cake bigger is the key, should be the key aim. But because of the IFS's, if I may say so, fixation on this bit of the economy, we have a real problem.
Policies are not about making the cake bigger, are they? I mean, when you're talking about rising corporation tax levels, you know, the implication longer term is you're going to make it possibly less attractive at a time of Brexit for people to come in.
There's no correlation between rising corporation tax and increased or lower investment. In fact, we have a really big problem with very low investment tax by our
I don't think I'd necessarily agree with that. I mean, I think the reason why many countries have cut corporation tax rates is because it is a good way of attracting foreign investment, and it's worked in this country. We've had very high foreign investment.
It hasn't. The OECD showed that it hasn't.
I think it's a more general thing that if you're going to introduce a system system where you say things like, we are going to regulate the amount of pay that companies can pay, and we're going to introduce other requirements on companies, you are interfering with the marketplace.
And this is what Mrs May is trying to do, because Mrs May, like all politicians, realise that the people the public are very unhappy with the 1% running away with all the gains from this crisis, and the rest of us having to carry the burden.
But I just think
that's a political reality.
A bigger role for the state is not going to produce a better economy.
OK,
Excuse me, but it saved the banks.
I'll see you in the green room later. We can carry on. Thank you. Jeremy Corbyn promised today the manifesto contained policies that were very popular, and perhaps it's hard to argue with the sound of some of what's on offer: extra funding for the NHS, financial provision for social care, equal rights for all workers, free childcare. But of course, there's a cost to all this first and an implementation of it all after. So what do voters make of what's on offer, and do they believe Jeremy Corbyn is the man they trust to deliver it? Here's David Grossman.
Although Jeremy Corbyn didn't officially set out his stall today, we got some pretty strong indications of what he and his party might be offering. Renationalising rail and Royal Mail services, as well as capping energy prices. Increasing the minimum wage, as well as abolishing tuition fees. More cash for the NHS and more cash for social care, as well as an executive pay levy. These are among the highlights. According to polling, all of them get pretty strong support from the public.
It's places like this, Watford, that Jeremy Corbyn and Labour need their manifesto to have maximum impact. It was Labour until 2010, when it went over to the Conservatives. But if Jeremy Corbyn wants to be Prime Minister, he more or less has to retake seats like this. Do those sorts of policies sound attractive to you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I've got an 18-year-old who's thinking of going to university, so the fee element is brilliant. Utilities, as a parent as well, you know, we have to look at bills and stuff. And the rail, I mean, I used to travel to London as well, and it's a nightmare. If they had those policies, I would vote for them.
Really? And that would be enough to change your...
Oh, absolutely. At the moment, you know, who do I vote for?
I worked for the railway for 33 years, so I'd definitely like to see them renationalised.
Would you vote for a party that gave you those policies, or would you want something else? Would you want...
I don't know who to vote for. I normally vote for Labour. I'm a member of the Labour Party, but I'm loath to say what I really think at the minute.
Go on, tell me.
Theresa May has got some charisma about her. You feel like if she says she's going to do something, that she'll do it. So I'm very, very undecided still. Although I'm a great believer in Labour policy, I don't know how much they would do.
Although by no means a scientific survey, the attitudes we found in Watford are backed up by polling about how people decide who to vote for.
For a lot of people, it's not about specific policies. Instead, it's about broad stories. So a lot of people will want education in this country to improve, but they won't really be interested in how the parties go about that. A lot of people want the health service to get better, but the minutiae of the detail around health service policy isn't of interest to people. And people want a strong economy that is growing, but they're not really interested in how the parties go about that. And so it comes down to who they trust, who they think can be effective, and who they think can be a strong leader. And that's where Labour is behind at the moment and needs to improve.
Although of course important, manifestos on their own, it seems, don't decide elections.
David Grossman there. Now, the temptation is always to find a name for a political philosophy. Are we looking at a Bennite vision or the ghost of Kinnock, Milibandism and so on? It is irrepressible, that urge to box something up, place it, describe it with what you know. So instead of fighting it, we gave into it. We've come up with this. It is our grid, blackboard, and we can use it to describe what our pundits think, where they think Corbyn sits amongst other Labour leaders. So on the left, you can see down here, I don't know if you can get right in there, Michael Foot. We put him on the left of our board here. This is within the context of Labour, obviously, in the 1983 manifesto. In the middle, we've got Ed Miliband here from 2015. On the right, we've got Tony Blair, let's call it 1997, you might want to call it 2001. And we've also done a top to bottom, which is style at the top, substance here. So let me introduce our panel right now. We've got Ian Dale, radio presenter for LBC, Faiza Shahan, the director of think tank Class, and Stephen Bush, special correspondent for the New Statesman. And we're going to throw you in it straight away, Faiza. I'm going to give you each a rosette, a magnetic rosette. And this has got Jeremy Corbyn on it, as you'll see. Can you give us a sense of, and you can shift these around if you like, of where you'd place Jeremy Corbyn. You can look at substance, you can look at style, you can look at left and you can look at right in terms of the manifesto draft that we've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, this is really tricky because it's actually about context. So the context in which we've seen this manifesto today, we know that, of course, we've got nurses going to food banks, we've got young people in huge amounts of debts, we've got consumer debt rising, we've got just a whole bunch of problems. And when you look at the manifesto, a lot of that stuff looks quite sensible. So I have a problem with this axis. I'm really struggling to know.
You could shift the middle if you want. I mean, if that's what you're saying, you shift the middle.
I mean, sorry. I'm just going to put it here because, and then maybe can I move it around at the end?
Of course you can.
It's got substance and style. It's to the left, but you know we have to understand each of these leaders in the context.
So you're putting it to the left of Ed Miliband, but not as far left as some people have been saying. No. So in between Foot and Miliband, then is that fair enough?
Yeah, that's fair enough. He goes further on some things, but it's really about
Ian. This is your rosette.
I think this, and congratulations on the money that you've spent on this, saving licence fee payers money. Michael Foot, I think, should be a little bit further down and to the right, because I think Jeremy Corbyn is intrinsically to the left of Michael Foot. Michael Foot, remember, was actually in the Labour government for many, many years.
You've got your own rosette. This is
Pfizer's.
So you have to leave hers there. That's your rosette.
And Ed Miliband, I think he deserves to be squeezed in the middle, if you remember his phrase in the last election. I think he was actually a little bit more to the left. And Tony Blair, you've put, bowing to consensus on the left, that he's actually on the extreme right. He actually wasn't. If you look at a lot of the things he did, people on the left ought to be proud of them, but they're not for some reason. So I think we put him a little bit further to the left. And Jeremy Corbyn...
So everyone has moved to the left?
Yeah, I'm tempted to put Jeremy Corbyn here, but it won't stick.
It's not magnetic, sorry.
So I think we'll have to put him
on the word left. All right.
Okay.
Stephen, over to you.
Well, I'm also going to move Ed and Tony around. So I'm going to move Ed a bit. And then because actually... Imagine for a moment that Jeremy Corbyn was saying, I'm going to declare that everyone in the Metropolitan Police is racist. We go, what? Is this a communist? But Tony Blair did that. If we said he's going to increase the statutory floor for how much people can be paid, not by 30% as he plans to do, but by 100%, we'd go, well, that's radical. But Tony Blair did that. If Jeremy Corbyn was saying, I'm going to make every museum and art gallery free, we'd go, yeah, I mean, who is this leftist? But Tony Blair did all of that. And actually... in many ways, the style axis is the most important one. So Jeremy is right out to the left in terms of style. Ed is a little bit in between, and obviously Tony Blair...
Style, though, goes style to substance.
Yeah.
So you're saying he has less substance? Or...
Well, they're all substantial documents, but actually, Jeremy Corbyn is running on a posture of left-wing politics. Ed Miliband running on a posture of left-wing... Whereas Tony Blair's priority was to reassure the middle classes, aspirational working class, people who didn't usually vote Labour to vote Labour. But actually, if you look at the tone of all four of these manifestos, they're a lot closer together than we think.
That's where Jeremy Corbyn fails on the aspirational front. You're right, Tony Blair did that in spades. He got people voting Labour that had never voted Labour in the past. You look at this manifesto today, you saw a bit of it in your films, it doesn't appeal, even though there is a poll out from the Daily Mirror tonight, from Comres, that lists all of these different policies, and people say, oh, yeah, I quite like these individual policies. When you add them all up together, they don't. And that's why Jeremy Corbyn should not be there. He should be much further over to the left and maybe sort of less substance.
But that's not to do with left policy, I don't think. I don't think that's to do with the policies in the document. I think that's to do with other things. So it's to do with other things. So one of the things that, the discussion before, which is about the credibility of those policies, whether they'll have the money to back it up. So I think that is the thing that complicates this. And, of course, Ed Miliband... he probably would have wanted to go this left in some ways, but he didn't because they completely bought into, you can only spend as much as you have from taxes. They wouldn't admit to any kind of borrowing, whereas there's been a little bit of break from that in this leaked manifesto today to say that we will at least...
A bit of a break.
Well, they've at least... Well, we'll see. We haven't seen the full content.
Do you think it change it? I mean, if what they're saying is right and it comes down to leadership or capability in terms of, who the leader is, none of the policies even matter. I mean, we're not at that point, are we?
No, people see things through the policy. We shouldn't forget that Jeremy Corbyn is running against someone whose manifesto is basically, look, trust me, it'll be OK.
But this could break the narrative of the election, do you think?
No, what matters is whether or not they can turn people around and whether or not Jeremy Corbyn is someone people trust in Downing Street. and they see the policies, people see the policies entirely through the prism of the leader. And that's actually, I think, what this chart really reveals. If we had a focus group here, they would put Tony Blair right in the middle where they were. They'd put Ed a little bit to the left of them. Most people wouldn't know who Michael Foot was anymore. And they'd probably say, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, he's a bit to my left as well. But actually, really, it's about whether or not the leader is reassuring and safe.
Do you think there's anything that Theresa May has read from today or last night's manifesto that she's going to nick?
I'll tell you what, if you had put Theresa May in front of a computer and said, would you like to write the Labour manifesto, Theresa, to your maximum benefit, she would have written 90% of this because it plays into her playbook.
But she also, as we know, nicked a policy that Ed Miliband introduced 2 years ago.
In a manifesto of this length, there are going to be things that you think, well, actually, that sounds quite good. I've just read all 45 pages of it, and there were 1 or 2 things you think, yeah, that sounds OK. But you add all the policies up together, and it plays into Conservative hands. She's framing this election on 2 things, on Brexit, and there's about 3 pages on Brexit, and it says absolutely nothing. And also as a presidential contest between her and Jeremy Corbyn. And the last week of the campaign, I can tell you right now, will be pitching herself against Jeremy Corbyn and saying, who do you think will negotiate best in Brussels? They've gone off that a bit over the last week or so, but they will come back to that.
I'm glad that you've brought up Theresa May, because actually it's a bit odd to do this exercise with actually not just comparing. Why are we comparing Labour with Labour? We should be comparing Labour with what the Conservatives want to do. And, of course, we haven't heard much about what they'll do on schools, what they'll do on the NHS, what they'll do on lots of these issues that Corbyn has listed in this document. And so, really, it's about coming back and comparing what it is. You're right that they want to focus on Brexit. They want to focus on leadership.
You want us to come back next week, don't you?
Stephen, you have a last word.
But the reason why we're comparing Labour is that in 2015, Labour got 9 million votes, Tories got 11 million votes. The difficulty is there is nothing any of these Rosettes are offering to any of those 2 million people that they need to move over to suggest that they're any better than Ed.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks for coming in. That is all for this evening, but before we go, we were wondering whether you could give us a hand. We've noticed that 1 or 2 prominent politicians have all but disappeared from public view since the election got underway. So this week, Newsnight has sent John Sweeney to find one of them, the Environment Secretary, Andrea Leadsom. She's evaded him so far, apart from this cryptic tweet. If anyone knows where these woods are, do let us know.
Well, things start to turn a bit more unsettled from the south at 3.